I'll just let you know, last Friday I had some ear surgery and I can't hear squat out of my left ear. I couldn't hear a lot before, I can hear absolutely nothing now, so I will try to point the good ear to you, and if you have something for Phillips, just kind of raise the hand. I don't know sign language, but I do know that. So thanks for that. So by the way, I have some talking points here for the rate study for you. Last time this was completed, 2019, thank you. Just wanted to let you know it's been quite a bit of time. First 2 to 3 years of the rate study are pretty solid, taking into account what we think is going to be happening from a staffing perspective, materials, equipment, the CIP, those sort of things are in there. And then after that, we just kind of keep it at CPI, which is at the inflation rate, the local inflation rate here, which again, does not necessarily keep us up with the Joneses of what's actually happening in the plan. So throw that out there for you. Some of the considerations and planning factors that we took into play, it's great here, and I hope you don't mind if I point at you, okay? But bam, Councilmember Oliver, Councilmember Damon, and Councilmember West, you guys all got a chance to see all this before the other four, because we talked about this for 6 weeks. I think that you were part of the Public Works Department, coming in and hearing about, okay, what is the Public Works Department? More importantly, what's our wastewater treatment plan and the things that go along with that? So what we're going to talk about today is what are those planning factors that we took into it? Well, we took into account our capital improvement plan, which you guys will be seeing here coming up. What does that take into account? Our conveyance system. We're talking miles and miles of pipe that are around here. The pump stations that are associated with them, 24 different ones. The wastewater treatment plant itself and all the equipment that's contained within it. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars worth of what I just said that we take into consideration. A second planning factor is the operating fund itself. So you may be asking, why is it that solid waste and the wastewater treatment and the surface water are enterprise funds? Well, they're a pay to play. They are a rate that comes in. It gets spread throughout the city. You set the policy that's associated with them, but unlike the general fund, they have to be spent 100% within that particular rate. So don't take this the wrong way, but it's elected proof from a standpoint that y'all can't touch it. You can tell us what to do with it, but it has to stay in the wastewater domain. Okay, so that's a good news story. The other thing that's in this operating fund that we take into account, or the enterprise fund, is your staffing. And for the 3 new council members, we talked about, we got a bunch of retirements that are coming up. We have a plan that we'd like to go ahead and put into play to be able to get people started, integrated into the system, fade the old geezers away. Do the same thing. Well, I'm a protected class now, Aaron. Turned 62 yesterday, so I'm one of the common few. Yeah, so anyway, the idea is, as we're starting that transition, we want to continue to make sure that we get new blood in, they get trained up, retirements can happen. Bottom line for the citizens, it's the same activity that we got going on. Okay, no drop in service. It also takes into account daily preventative emergent maintenance that comes into play, and I'm sure you guys have seen all of that coming in there. The material that's associated with it, and then the equipment that is built into the budget, next year budget, and within our CIP. It also includes operating fund reserves. So if you think about the times when we were in COVID, and you're like, oh boy, I wonder what happened. We'll share with you tonight what happened to our operating fund over that. We had 120 days worth of working capital. We're down underneath of 90 now, and we're recommending that we get above 90, so that again, if we have another act of God that occurs, we're able to sit there and continue operations for 90 days. And if there's a lack of revenue coming in, or material or equipment prices go up, we can still operate the plant. You don't have to worry about flushing the toilet. It'll still work. Next thing we took a look at was the comprehensive plan development. Okay, I know you're very well informed as you're going through this particular process, but as we're looking to increase single, multi, ADU, commercial activity, all of that has an impact on that plan. As part of that, we came to you a few years ago for the newer council members. You got outbriefed on it, but for the new council, or for the old council members, you've been here for a while, was that combined sewer study. We've already had a study million, 1.2, 1.3 million that we paid to have done that we outbriefed you is that how can we gain 5 million gallons of effluent being processed by the plant during the rainy season and not have to sit there and have an impact, for development, because that's going to be your limiting factor. So that was taken into account as well, because again, think plant, hundreds of millions of dollars. The levee that you saw going around it, knock one side of it out, the property that needs to be acquired, and then new aerating, new other facilities down there in order to sit there and manage or to be able to handle the new development that's being done. Or within the plan here, you have that CSO study that we spent good money on, and we have a plan to go ahead and advocate to make that happen. Staffing, we talked about that. Retention, sorry for the cringeworthy retirement thing. And then, the idea of having, no new wastewater treatment personnel have been added to the city in over 2 decades. So if you think about 2 comprehensive plans, all the development that's happened in the city, my department, whether you're looking at solid waste, surface water, or wastewater, has not had a new employee added to it. So what I owe you is the fact that as we get that new comp plan done, what are the impacts to each one of these particular rates? And as a new development comes in, I'll partner with Steve and his staff over in development services to come up with, is it a 0.1 FTE? Is it a 0.2 FTE? So that ultimately, when we have that, come to it, hey, we're coming up to a person, being able to come back to you and tell, what are the impacts? Why do we need this particular individual? And then you can kind of connect the dots that go associated with that. And then the last part of this that I'll add to you is with our efforts with GIS. Okay, when you think about all the mapping, we've got over 200 and some miles worth of wastewater lines, surface water lines, streets and things. Streets and stuff you can see. But what lies beneath is really what has concerned me since I've been Public Works Director. And you've got a mosaic underneath there. You've got concrete, you've got terracotta, you've got steel, and then you've got some others. And the idea here is the steel is rotting. So what do you need to do? You need to line them. We need to be able to get a lining program back up again. And now that our GIS has captured a lot of the data that we need, I can come before you and categorically go, these are areas that need to be done to the tune of about $500,000 a year in order to get your system back to where it needs to be in order to serve the community. So again, a lot of these things, the new council members, sorry, you got it in 6 weeks or so of conversation and a lot of head nods there, so I appreciate that. And for the older council members, this isn't anything but just a review of what's happened in the past. But these particular planning factors, if you will, apolitical. Doesn't really matter, flushing the toilet, doesn't matter whether you're an R, an I, or a D. You gotta flush the toilet, and you like to think that the water that goes back in the river meets the standard, and I will let you know that guy right there, Gary Duranzo, our plant manager, has for 20 plus years, our plant has received awards from the state for doing things the right way. So again, your subject matter expertise down there, I think is beyond reproach. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you Kevin. Why don't you come on up? And Kevin's going to go ahead and provide you, it's like 13 different slides that you've had a look at. What I would ask is if we could go through the slideshow first, and then if there's any questions that you have in there, that we go ahead and handle them at the end. Okay, if that's okay. The one big money slide I would just sit there and probably say is slide number 9, which gets into options for rates. You got a glide slope like that, you got a glide slope like that, you got a few that are in the middle. It's open for dialogue and conversation, and I think again, it should be a good spirited conversation as we move forward. Without further ado, Kevin, you got it.
Great. Thanks everybody. Nice to be here with y'all. We'll get into it. So, as an add-on to the comprehensive plan or the general sewer plan, we are looking at doing a rate study, and there are a lot of reasons why to do a rate study. And all of these things are kind of coming together for you guys right now. Chris, did a lot of those already. Planning fund balance being one of them. The general sewer plan has the new CIP in it. Got to figure out how to fund all that. And it's been a long time since the last one. So those are the main reasons why you want to look at having one of these studies done. So what is a rate study? There's actually 2 studies that we're doing here technically. there's the comprehensive rate study, and the system development charge study, which is also sometimes referred to as like a connection charge or hookup fee. So the rate study is 3 studies that are kind of all interrelated. The first one is called the revenue requirement. That's basically your financial plan. We're taking the revenue, comparing it to the expenses, and seeing if there's a delta. And then we figure out, okay, well, how much of a difference is there? Let's look at it in a percentage way, and it kind of tells us what we need to do with rates. Factored into there also is, the fund balance piece, which we've already hit on a couple of times. How is that going to trickle down? Is there revenue in excess going to actually get into that operating fund to be able to fund, those emergencies that we're talking about? And so that's the revenue requirement. So that kind of sets the stage for the cost of service. The cost of service then takes that revenue requirement and then splits it up between your different customer types. So, your residential, your multifamily, and your commercial and industrial. So we're going to say how much of this big pie of the revenue requirement should be paid for by these different classes of service. And that's done in a couple different ways, which we'll get into. But after we figure out how much each of these customer classes should make up of this pie, then we do the rate design. And the rate design is just simply taking the revenue requirement, the cost of service, and putting them together to figure out what the rate needs to be by different customer classes. Now, you guys are the regulatory body of this utility, so you guys kind of have the say of how this all happens. Different states have different rules, and one of the rules that, like, say, California has to do is they have to follow that cost of service study. You guys don't, but we'll look at that when we get there. So that's the rate study side of things. The connection fee analysis, system development charge analysis, there's a lot of different names for it. But that is that fee that new developers pay, or new development pays, to basically buy into the system. And that actually has 2 different pieces. There's the buy-in component, which we're saying, this is our system right here, this is how many people it can serve, and we have this much extra. And so it's that much extra that we're trying to put a value on it. So we take that value divided by the number of people that can fit into that existing system, so that we call that ERUs, and then that's part of the connection fee. That's the buy-in component. The other part is the incremental component, and that's that future component when we're saying, we need to expand the system to be able to fit these new customers into our system. So the whole point of this is to try to create equity between the people that are already connected, have been here for years, already paid for a lot of capital, paid for the system as it sits today, and the new people that are coming in. They're going to cause you to have to pay, expansion of, pipelines and the treatment plant. There's all these different things out there that need to get paid for. So that's the issue there, is trying to create equity between existing and future customers. A common term that people always say or phrase is growth pays for growth. We'll move on from there. So for this particular study, there were a couple factors that we were specifically looking at. Preserve core operations. This kind of has a little bit to do with the falling operating fund balance. So obviously, if your operating fund is starting to lose money, then you're eating into that because your revenue is not sufficient. So just you want to have your revenue sufficient to be able to meet the operations, keep your service levels where you want to be, and and then the next piece is stabilizing the fund balance. Again, we've hit this a bunch of different times, but the fund balance has been declining over time, and you actually have 3 funds. Actually, there's the operating fund, the expansion fund, and the capital fund. So the operating fund is your checkbook for paying the bills, and then your expansion and capital fund, those are the ones that pay for the the roof repair and all those other kind of things that everybody's got to pay for, but nobody likes to because it's more expensive. But anyway, all these different things we need to consider when we're looking at this, and so stabilizing that fund, trying to get at least 60 days of operations. So basically 90 to 60 days, what that means is we're taking the O&M cost, divide by 365, multiply by 60, and that's like the minimum fund balance. So 60 and 90 are pretty standard industry numbers. Those are pretty standard. Now, there are a lot of utilities that have much higher. There are some folks that have, 180, some have 365, and, that's a lot of money. But, one thing that these other folks are considering is future borrowing. So, Fitch, Moody's, all these rating agencies, they're gonna look at how much money you have in the bank in this terms to see, like, ultimately when they decide your bond rating. And a AAA bond rating usually has upwards of 365 days on it. Okay, so the third one there is the invigorate the infrastructure fund, infrastructure funding. So historically, the city is always, or the utility has always transferred $1 million of current revenue, money that comes in through the door in that year, into the capital fund, and that's ultimately how all the capital is being paid for. Not all of it, I should say. There's probably, that's like a good baseline on that, but there's going to be more here and there as time goes on, more or less, because capital is really volatile, and that's another thing you have to consider is, you can have a really low amount one year and a very high amount another year, and you guys are going to face this exact thing in the very long run. If we start to look out 20 years, there's a couple different projects out there that are pretty expensive. So we have to consider, how are we going to, curve to meet that with our operating funds or your capital funds. And then the workforce succession, we're looking at 3 new FTEs, and Chris hit on it, talking about how there hasn't been a lot of new blood in the wastewater department. So we're looking at 3 new people, and one of them is going to be, I think, replacing Gary, maybe eventually someday. So I think that it's important to look at the positive side of it. Everything I've been talking about has been pretty negative. So what have you got going for you? You have the proven in-house savings. The wastewater team has been pretty on hands at doing a lot of different things like installations and stuff, and ultimately that's going to save the ratepayers money. So they're not hiring things out that they can do themselves, so you're saving some money there. Looking at like automation to help create some additional savings. One of the big deals is the impending payoff of your debt, which will be done in 2030. That's when it'll be fully paid off. So $1.8 million there, which is not insignificant, especially for your utility. But you also have that structural deficit, which we keep on harping on, is that reduction in fund balance. Simply your expenditures are outpacing your revenue. And then we have our 10-year capital demands, and that's also Chris hit on pretty good with the CSOs and the lining projects. And those are like year-by-year programs. So a lot of times we have capital projects, but sometimes you have programs. I would call those programs. Those are things that you're trying to build into your rate over a period of time. So what needs to be chewed on with you guys is, how are we going to get there? How quickly do we restore the transfer of funds? How quickly do we tackle the CSO or the lining project? Those are the things that we have to weigh. They're all trade-offs. It's like lower rates. It's going to take longer to do those things. So that's why we have 4 different scenarios, is to look at different ways that we can get there. So I've talked about operating reserves quite a bit already, but just to kind of hit it again, we want to maintain the cash flow, and there's emergencies that pop up, like Chris said with COVID-19. A lot of people stop paying their bills, and then that's going to create a cash crunch. There could be significant failures in the system that you have to respond to right away. You can't wait. You gotta hit these things right away. So that could be a significant financial impact. And then, of course, like I said before, with the rating agency, the credit worthiness. 90 days, again, conservative. 180 days, even better. But let's stick with what's manageable here. Capital funding, that $1 million, I think it was the last 2 years, it hasn't been fully transferred, or there wasn't a transfer just because there wasn't enough money in the bank or money coming in the door. So that's what we want to get back to is getting back that $1 million baseline amount for capital funding. Again, the timing of the sewer lining and the CSO project, when are we going to do that? And also like leveraging the money you've already spent. So you've done a lot of the front work. So now put that money to work. Leverage it. And then what you have to decide is how is it better to delay a year, push it forward a year? What are the things that are most important from your guys' perspective? Is it getting the capital going right away? Is it getting fund balance up right away, or is it restoring that $1 million transfer into the capital fund? So that was basically the revenue requirement in large. That's what was driving that. So this is basically the result of the cost of service. Now, bear in mind, this is the upfront 12% right-of-way rate adjustment. And what we can see here is that residential is pretty close to being at their cost of service. Multi-residential is a little bit behind compared to the overall, and then commercial needs to go up quite a bit. Industrial needs to go up 12%. So, compared to the 12%, residential is pretty close. Got a I misspoke. The real reduction in multi-residential, going down up 7% compared to the 12%, and commercial going up 18% compared to the 12%. So just to speak to multi-residential briefly, it's very common to see these kind of results in a sewer cost of service study. It's oftentimes, you look at residential as a class as a whole, and in reality, there's usually a lot less like wastewater use, usage going on in multi-residential. It could be fewer people, it could be just fewer things going on, generally speaking. So this is a common result. We often see multi-residential or multi-family having to go down. So here is that slide 9 that Chris was talking about. And so just to kind of talk this out a little bit, number one is we're going to do it all right now. We're going to hit it, get to 90 days right away, after that $1 million right away, no delays in the CSO, no delays in the sewer restoration or sewer lining. Two is, spreading it out a little bit. And so each of these is going to, bump something's going to get bumped further out as we go, further down the line. You're going to stay at the 60-day operating reserve, but you're not getting to the 90-day until 2030. You're going to get that transfer of $1 million in 2028, and there's no delay in the CSO and sewer restoration. So this is a matrix, and these are the scenarios that we laid out, but there's a lot of different ways that they could fall together. And if you move some things around, you could still come up with the same rate results. It's just that different things are moving around. So just bear that in mind as we look at these. Again, scenario 3, getting to the 90 days at 2029, operating the transfer to the capital fund in 2030, and so on. This is all here. So really, when you think about this, we're probably all going to end up in the same place as we get over time. We'll see a slide when we get there. So just to look specifically at some of these scenarios and the results compared to for like the reserve funds. So for O&M, the dotted line is that target amount, the 90 days, and then the blue line is the 12%, 8%. You can see that's going up pretty substantially quickly. And then the other ones are kind of lagging behind with, scenario 4 being the lowest increase, the 4%. It's getting there at a slower pace. Just to look at it from a combined reserve fund, because, that's just operating fund and the other two are the capital funds. You can kind of see there's, a little bit of a a drop down, then it kind of just springs up again as they kind of start to get close to the same spot as time goes on. Here is the residential impact of the different scenarios, and kind of as I was talking, looking at getting in the same place by the end of the time period, if you look in that further right-hand column and see what the rates are, you can kind of see they're all close to the same spot. But it's all about how we get there. So do we get there right away, or do we get there over time? And ultimately what it comes down to is, if you get there right away, you're gonna have more money because those rates will be in place for longer, and you just collect more money through the years. So that's one thing to consider. So how do you compare with other folks? You guys, I think, are doing pretty good. We have a lot up here of different agencies. We can see the average is that green line. That's not including Mount Vernon. I picked them out of this average, but you can see that you're well below the average. I mean, you have to consider some of these obviously are pretty high, and you would expect them to be, right? Bothell, Seattle, Bellevue, those ones, they all have really fancy, high, expensive treatment plants. I know Everett is looking at fancy, expensive treatment plants right now, so we're all going to get there eventually. But right now, you're doing pretty good. And this is just a one-year look, so you can see, like, scenario 1 is that 12%, and then scenario 2 is that, I forget the actual percentages, but you can see how that kind of tapers off. So that was the rate study in a nutshell. So here's the connection chart. So again, this is the creating equity between current and future customers. And you can see here on the screen a pretty alarmingly large number going from $9,000 to $16,000. It's doubling. This is something that this is what the numbers tell us. This isn't me saying that you have to do this. The state law requires that we calculate it in a certain way, and essentially there are some limitation factors that we have to abide by. But ultimately, we're giving you the maximum that you can implement. But you can do anything underneath that. So you can go up to $16,000 right away next year, or you could leave it flat for the next 5 years. You could get to that $16,000 over 4 years. There's a lot of different ways to get there. And the major considerations here is, again, the equity between existing and future customers and paying for that future capital. And possibly, development. That's something that often comes up is, whether you want to keep this fee at a somewhat lower level, especially compared to your neighbors, so that developers will come to your town and create tax dollars. So those are the considerations that you have to think about while deciding whether $16,000 is the right number. So I basically hit all this already. The main driving factor of that $16,000 is the 50 million clarifier and digester that are going to happen, not in this next 10 years, but in the next 10 years after that. So bear in mind that this is looking out pretty far in the future, but based on the growth assumptions that we have, which is 1%, it's pretty in line with what a lot of places use. But if we increase that growth assumption, what that does is that reduces the number, or that increases the number of ERUs. That's the divisor. So that means that $16,000 becomes smaller, and vice versa. If you reduce that growth factor like to maybe 0.5%, that's going to make the number of ERUs in the next 20 years smaller, which makes your SDC larger. So just keep all that in mind. I know that part of the maybe some discussions that have happened here is the whole nutrient removal project out in the future. That's a kind of a gray area when it comes to including it in an SDC. because it's a regulatory project, it's not necessarily a capacity-driven project, and that's the key to including in an SDC in calculation is that it has to be a capacity increasing project. So nutrient removal, gray area, I left it out. That would have just skyrocketed your SDC. It would have been $30,000 or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was going to be huge. So leaving it off, I think is fine. So here we are at questions.
Okay, I'm sure everybody has questions, so I'm gonna go one at a time. I mean, we'll just cycle through like we're supposed to. So who has the middle to say?
I'll go first. I have one question on the connection fee. Do we know what the other cities in the county are charging?
Yes, we do. I don't have them with me. I worked with some of your neighbors and I put this together multiple times. I didn't put it in here and I probably should have, and I apologize. That's something that I can provide to you later on. I'll follow up.
Fantastic, because whether we like it or not, we always get compared.
Yeah.
Human nature.
Mm-hmm.
My second question is probably more for Chris. When did we stop making our annual $1 million transfer? And why?
That would probably be more Doug than me, but do you wanna? We can tag team it if you want.
So this was the first budget of the year, 2026, and there just wasn't the funding there was available to be able to transfer that full $1 million over transfer.
Oh, excellent, just this year. I mean, it's not excellent, but
Yeah,
at
just
least
this
this is
year. This is the first
2026. I had envisioned multi-years.
No, this is the first one.
Okay.
So if you recall too, we've just been at CPI for like the last few years, so that number has been dwindling. And that's kind of where we are. That's, again, another major reason for coming here for this.
Okay, thank you.
Who has the question? Yeah, who go?
And this is a statement, I was looking it up while you were talking. $8,900 for Cedar Woolley, Anacortes is $13,000. Burlington is, they have a phase-in period of about $6,000 starting next year. Burlington, oh, that was Burlington, so anyways. So, it varies quite a bit. I think it probably has more to do with the sewer systems and less to do with, like, population.
That is actually a really great point that I wanted to bring up, is that even with rates and SDCs, you're all in unique positions. And, it's not a commodity in the sense that you have to charge or you can charge what everybody else charges. You all have costs that are higher or lower than everybody else. So that's a good, very, very good point.
Anybody? What else?
When we do this future report on what the needs are going forward, we will look at how infill development affects our systems that we currently have, and putting more load on a system there that wasn't designed for, or will we take that into account in
Well, I would say that's probably, the general sewer plan part of it.
So that's a great question, Councilmember Sarah. So this goes back to the GIS conversation that we had before. One is, what's the type of pipe? Two, what's the size of the pipe? Where I mentioned earlier is that there really is no rhyme or reason. You could have a 6-inch pipe going to an 8-inch to a 4-inch to a 12-inch. But what would come into play is much like what we do for traffic. So hey, a development's coming in, what's it doing to all the streets and things that are around there? What needs to be improved? We do have a model that's for our 12-inch lines, so basically everything that goes into it will have that model, but this is another tool that development services can use, that if we if we extensively plan very well and put a new development of some sort in the area that council deems appropriate with the developer, then there will be a cascading effect of things that happen beneath. And we should be able to run that through a model and provide that impact for you. That's what I meant to say. Instead of myself all more public educated.
I apologize, Chris, I knew what you meant.
And I'll just follow up by saying, with connection charges, it's a little bit of a planning nightmare in the sense that you have this big project out in the future, like you guys do, and it's not certain when exactly it's going to get done. You know, it's going to happen eventually, but it's all about collecting that money. But there again, development happens at very uneven levels, right? It could be, fast for a couple of years, it could level off for a couple of years, but ultimately we want to get there in the future. So there's also a little bit of a mismatch between when the project is built versus when the project would be fully utilized, right? So you have a certain amount of capacity that is built into, that's going to expand into the future, but at some point when it gets built, you're not going to utilize all that capacity. So up until that point, you would have collected some SDCs, but not necessarily all the SDCs that would have been, intended to pay for that particular project.
If I could just real quick, so when you think about the traffic impact fees, every year we're coming up with a new number and providing it to you. Well, I should say Development Services working with Frank is coming with a new number that's approved by council. You can have a similar thing happening with these impact fees, because every time something comes in, as Kevin had mentioned, you have the denominator is getting larger, so therefore the fees, in theory, could change on an annual basis. Two other fees I'd ask you for your planning consideration is your park fees, which I don't think have been updated in a while, which again is another revenue generator for new development coming in and the impacts that they will have on your parks. And the same way with fire. So there are four that come into play, and there's no reason why, just as like we had developed the TIP, and then when we're coming to you and talking about the utilities, it's the same process. We're just changing the name of what we're talking about, but the process is the same. There's absolutely no reason why that couldn't be a consideration in your discussions regarding the comprehensive plan.
And
set the policy.
And with connection charges, it's very common, and I believe you guys have done it in the past, where you take that connection charge and you increase it on an annual basis to keep up with inflation. So that's something that it's allowed under state law. Lots of people do it. You use the engineering news record CCI or some other index to increase that, so it's keeping up with inflation.
I just want to say that I was really surprised at the 1% number for growth, because we know what kind of pressure we're under from the state level to add more housing, and so are all the other cities in Washington. So I'm surprised that it's that low. To be honest, I thought it would be a little bit higher.
That's a tough one, and when it comes to revenue, my philosophy is always to kind of underestimate what existing revenue would be, existing growth would be, because you don't want to be on the other side of it. And also on expenses, you want to be a little bit on the high side. So that's the conservative approach I like to take. But once you adopt fees to in the future, here, this year, whatever, doesn't mean it has to be set in stone. It could be looked at in the future. A lot of times, again, with other utilities, they'll adopt 4 years of fees, and the way that they kind of couch it is they say, we will go up to this point at a maximum. And basically they try to leave a little bit of room to say, if we decide that the need's not there, we'll come in a little under.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thanks, David.
So, just one closing item before we go to Frank is obviously an opportunity for you to think about policy, think about other considerations that you have. So I'll be back on the 12th, but if you have any questions in the September meeting, because again, the time is of the essence, and the longer we wait, the longer impacts it has with Doug and us, Gary, to be able to actually make some of these things come to fruition. So if there's any questions or comments between now and then, please email them out, call me. We can set up a time to meet with Kevin virtually if need be, and as long as we don't have a quorum, we should be good to go with that. Yes, sir.
Well, just because time is of the essence, I don't know if you're looking for a greater discussion tonight or not, but I can tell you guys where I'm at, having looked at this for a little bit now. which is that I'm not interested in doing a 12% increase and then a 6% increase or an 8%. That is just not, for me personally, I can't do that to people. So if other people have other feelings about that, I'd love to hear them, but that's a big no for me. And the $16,000 hookup, it's nearly doubling what we have. That's gonna be a no for me.
It's a discussion, obviously, because that's the maximum, so that's definitely something we all need to discuss.
And I don't know if you guys wanna talk about it now, or if you wanna wait for another one. I was just, time is of the essence, and so if you wanted to flush it out a little bit right here, right now, I'm good with it. If not, then I can just stop right there.
I don't know that we have time right now.
Fair enough.
Maybe if we go through Frank's presentation, if we have some time at the end, maybe we could revisit it. Okay.
Cool.
Thank you. So Frank, we're going to go ahead with the, we'll actually have the last three, so I'll just leave it to you.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. And I won't do this trying to talk around the butterscotch drop.
You're welcome. Nice job.
But it shouldn't take long, so that will leave some time for you for further conversation. So I just wanted to start with kind of my standard update on transportation projects in the city, kind of where they are at this point in time and where they're headed. The LaVenture Road widening project, we did complete construction activities on that project. I do anticipate bringing a council accept recommendation closeout to you a little later on here, probably early fall. We're just wrapping up some final payments, calculations with contractor before I bring that accept recommendation to you. The 2025 overlay project construction actually began a couple days ago. So we have started on that project, and again, our schedule is largely to try and get the overlay work on Old Highway 99 done and wrapped up before we hit the rainy season in October. So we're kind of cranking on that pretty hard to get that wrapped up for that. 15th Street sidewalk, as I mentioned in response to a question from Councilmember Hudson earlier, we did just finish construction activities on that project. That project's kind of been aging for a while on our transportation plan, and it was one of those that I just wanted to get done and off our plates as far as that goes. So got that done. My anticipation again is to bring a council accept recommendation and close out to you here fairly shortly, as soon as we wrap up kind of final payment associated with the project with the contractor. Excuse me, the 30th Street improvement projects, we're going to take delivery of the 60% plans and specs here later on this month, and so we kind of feel like that one's back on a delivery track to finish up the design early next year, which is kind of what we're trying to do in order to tee that one up to go to SCOG next spring to request construction funding associated with that project. The Riverside 1 and 2 projects, design continues to move forward towards the 95% point. We're in some conversations in terms of making sure that all of the review processes that were done before, that we kind of carried forward from the old project, are still kosher with everybody, despite the fact that we've made some changes along the way to that project. Should be all right. One of the changes that did happen with the Riverside 1 is, as I've alluded to you during previous updates, we were awarded an extra $200,000 in federal funding for the Riverside 1 project. And so the tip update that I'm bringing to you this evening, both updating during this committee meeting as well as for the public hearing a little later, is to incorporate that new federal funding into the design phase of the project. That is a very fast track process to obligate that funding, so that's why you find me moving very quickly to get it done, because I have a deadline of September 8th, so I don't have a lot of council meetings to work with. Colson Trail lighting phase 3, the design is currently moved forward. We're still looking at getting to a 60% by the end of this month. We have ended up in a situation with the Colson projects where we found a pretty significant conflict between PSC's role that they play in the city relating to our street lighting and the federal requirements associated with this project. I had a meeting earlier this week to kind of brief the mayor on this. I've met with WashDOT local programs here earlier today to talk with them, following up on a letter that I sent them last week saying this is the problem. Met with PSC. PSC has, placed it this way. This is how I'm seeing the problem. Do you see it anywhere else? So what they agreed to today, they pulled in one of their specialists from down in Lacey to take a look at the situation and kind of give us an independent local programs review of my investigation and findings. And I'm waiting right now to get a time frame for that review to see how that may shape how we approach the project. The delivery of the project, we know we want to do the project and whatnot, so this is primarily a consideration of the federal funding that is in these projects. Division Street SR 536 Bridge Feasibility Study, the consultant was delayed in giving me the scope in sufficient time for me to talk with them about the scope before I could bring it to you tonight. So I'm going to be reviewing that over the next couple weeks, and I anticipate bringing that to you at the committee meeting in September. That'll be just the draft scope to kind of go over the elements of it. That won't be the agreement. I want to get your feedback on those draft scope items before we finalize the planning agreement with the consultant to move forward with that. The 10th Street, or the 10th and Warren and 18th and Hillcrest crosswalk improvement projects, I still need to get those up and advertised. For the sake of expediency, I am going to bundle those two separate projects together for the purposes of a single design, single construction delivery. It seems like it works fairly well for these two projects, and will increase our ability to get these things cranked out in design so that we're ready to go for construction next summer on both of them. 2025 pavement preservation update. We are receiving and reviewing the draft study report in order to see if we have any final comments. So anticipate completing at least the study and analysis portion of that. And then of course, there is the ongoing conversation in the future about the actual process of pavement preservation over the next 5 years. So there will be certainly more to come. I'm mostly just working on wrapping up the consultant study that we contracted. ADA transition plan, same thing. I do need to set up a public hearing and review of our inventory plan. I'm planning on getting that set up in September so that we can kind of bring that before you, talk about that at that point in time. We did actually end up with a little bit of a GIS data windfall vis-a-vis the University of Washington. The phase 2 of the inventory process that I was trying to figure out how to plan for this winter, they kind of did for us. And then they said, so we have this data, do you want it? I'm like, yes. So that actually has improved our delivery of the ADA transition plan for the streets that we need to get up and running. And that was kind of a welcome development. And then finally, the Blackbird Road Extension Planning Study. That's another one that I'm trying to reawaken and sit down with the consultant to talk about the two alternatives they've come up with. Basically, the two alternatives for the hypothetical future route of that roadway. The horizontal alignment's the same, it's just they have two different vertical alignments, and I need them to tell me what's the difference between the two, what are the pros and cons of each one of those. So I've got a meeting set up with them between city staff and then here in the next couple weeks to go over that. So I anticipate coming before you a little later this year to talk through those alternatives in terms of what the county is recommending. But that is a planning study that once it's done, pretty much will go on to a shelf for future use. It isn't going to roll straight into a project. So that's project. Just a brief overview of what I'm bringing tonight. I'm bringing a TIP amendment tonight, and just to kind of summarize some things about TIP amendments. They can be adopted at any point in time between our full TIP update periods. Our full TIP update periods take place during the spring because we have to time that update period with a whole bunch of subsequent updates through the rest of the year. So that's usually what creates that timeline. But it does, state law does leave us the option to be able to use an amendment process to make changes to the TIP during the year, usually to address emergency opportunities or emergent opportunities or any significant corrections to the adopted TIP for that year. In this case, our TIP Amendment 1 that I'm bringing to you tonight has both. They were posted on the city webpage, on the same page as the tip for the public review, and we advertised for tonight's public hearing the end of July and last week. The two changes, first change is to Riverside Drive Improvements 1, and it's to incorporate the awarded additional $216,000 in federal funding authority for the design phase through the Redistributed Obligation Authority process. Redistributed Obligation Authority, in brief, is a nationwide process where different regional transportation organizations, in our case SCOG, the Skagit Council of Governments, manages to achieve the goals that we said that we were going to do, and therefore is rewarded, if you will, by a chunk of the money from the people who don't manage to make their goals in any given year. And so they redistribute the funding accordingly. That redistribution can only happen for a project that's currently federal funded, and it can only happen for the current phase of a project that's currently federally funded. So you kind of have to look for your opportunities, especially since they don't tell us until the end of July that we even get it. And then they tell us every year that I've dealt with this, the deadline has moved earlier and earlier and earlier into September. And this year was no exception. So now it's September 8th. Actually, when they called me initially, they said September 7th, and I went, really? Labor Day? Your deadline is Labor Day, and that's when they came back with the 8th. I'm like, that doesn't help it. The other correction is, again, I'm kind of making good on a promise that I made to you a couple months ago. I forgot a project off the tip that I said I was going to put in the tip last November. So I found a place for it, getting it set up, estimated, preliminary funding strategy set up for it, just so we could incorporate it into the tip. Typically speaking, we try not to add new projects through tip amendments, but like I said, this one was one that I missed, and I did say that I would do that. So that is what the second addition is. It is actually a new project. And then last but not least, just some of the contract flow that's going on right now. We have a couple professional services agreement amendments, fairly small, associated with the 2025 overlay project to provide construction inspection. That's actually we renegotiated with the consultant, so it's actually a very, very small one, so it'll go to the mayor because it doesn't rise above our procurement limit. And same thing with a small amendment to our pavement preservation plan update to get access to some additional pavement visualization processes that they have that we think would be useful in terms of just looking at the pavement conditions that I've shared with you in the city on a more overall basis. We are still working on the professional services agreement for the design of the 2026 overlay project, and as I mentioned earlier, the Division Street Bridge Planning Study, which is coming to you later this year. Any questions for me?
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Frank.
We don't really have time to discuss the rate study at this minute because we need to stop a little early since we're taking our committee meetings now. But is there anything miscellaneous? Anybody has to add anything miscellaneous? I'll go with the order. I was going to suggest an agenda request to add the discussion to our next committee meeting because it's just a committee meeting we have. We don't have a council meeting right after it, so could we add this to the end of the committee meeting? Trying to say.
Is that my meeting?
Yep.
Is that my meeting?
Is that okay? Cool.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Melissa. Everybody okay with that? Just
It's a good idea.
Okay, good. Does anybody else have any agenda requests? Great. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 6:54. We will be back for